So this is this is just a minute to midnight into the 17th of August 2022. Kudilat television channel, timed at 23:58 hours GMT on Tuesday, the 16th of August 2022. This one contains an analysis of the satanic role being played by Fleet Street using the latest pretext concerning the agenda of denying the existence of the Muslims of the world and the ramifications of that denial. In 1989, during probably the only London-wide demonstration outside the Penguin Books, I noticed that the midget, the West Bengali origin midget Amit Roy, was standing on the side of the road watching the demonstrators. So I approached him and I said, "Why do you write this rubbish against Muslims?" Or words to that effect. And the midget, Amit Roy, was immediately shielded by a white racist who was about twice his height. And the white racist physically came very near me, as if to physically block me, suggesting that I was about to physically do something to the midget Amit Roy. I wasn't. I had met Amit Roy, the midget, quite a few times in Fleet Street before that. In fact, I had walked into the Telegraph Peterborough Court building in Fleet Street, and I had asked the reception to call Amit Roy down to the reception. The midget came, and I said to him he should explain to me why he wrote the pathetic rubbish about the society while he carried the name Amit Roy. I mean, he's a midget, and he's a midget, and he's a midget. And everything he said was a midget. Amit Roy and the freak Dondi, the fire worshipping, anti-Siloti, anti-Muslim aider and colluder of Satan Rushdie, Freak Dondi. Freak Dondi, the crook, who was appointed commissioning editor at Channel 4 television after I had succeeded in getting rid of the first incumbent in that post on account of her stupidity. Now, obviously, the Channel 4 executives at the time, they didn't think that they should consider consulting me about who they should appoint to this post. They didn't consult me and went ahead and gave in to the crafty lobbying created by the liar Freak Dondi. The freak had stolen the image of the Bangladeshis in East London, and we shall go to the extent, line by line, exposing the liar Freak Dondi in due course, not in this edition. So Freakdondi came to Channel 4 and began the corruption, the bribing, and creating his miniature ethnicity linked empire, rewarding the crook, horribly odious Nazareth. Horribly odious Nazareth is a Bombay born anti Muslim Citing who was used by the racist criminals involved in the Leveler magazine in the 1970s. Again, I shall update on this horribly odious Nazareth and the Freakdondi and other criminals that the racist so-called left in this country deployed when I took them on in defense of the community. They actually deployed these criminals because evidentially no other person from the background, Bangladeshi background, or from a similar background from any other geographical location, was known to be active in terms of the texts, in terms of the contents, in terms of the immorality and corruption, criminality that I spotted. Now, I, of course, diagnosed Leslie Garner and traced more or less essentially the same collection of Antisiloti Bengali parasites. So this one, when Channel 4 hired Freakdondi the crook, they obviously did that on their ignorance. And I have to say that the ignorance of these racists at Channel 4 persisted when it came to the mainstream, the main themes in the community. Bangladeshi community, essentially Muslim religion holding Bangladeshis in and around Brick Lane as a contextual kind of introduction. I mean, the midget Ali Asghar, the crook, was allowed to claim to have written a quote PhD thesis, calling it community Bangladeshi community groups in East London. Now, the midget criminal had benefited from my tutoring him about the history, the action of the community over, I think, a total of about 18 months or so. And yet the midget remained totally unchanged. He kept on lying. He was crafty. And he continued to persist while he perpetrated the fraud on the parents of the child that had been separated, or the children separated from the parents. Sanmia. The battle against each of these midgets and criminals is an essential part of the actual defense of the community, because it is demanding. It is very, very demanding, and it requires to be done meticulously in order that the criminals cannot come back with another lie, another phantom, denial, whatever. The midget Ali Asghar and his lying wife Mazeda lied together, and they lied to Sandra Compton. Now, these are people, the midget Ali Asghar and the midget wife Mazeda, the behavior, the two of these idiots, morons, invited me to their quote home in Leytonstone. Why on earth would they do that? These are people that had never, ever had any social dealings with me. And I'm not known to visit people's home, whether with my wife or not. So I wanted to see why these criminals invited me and my wife at the time. And it became clear that these criminals had decided, the midget Ali Asghar, the poison personified, and his midget wife Mazeda. They wanted to ask me and my wife whether we were going to have any children. Now, can you imagine? There was absolutely no history behind their inviting me and my wife at the time. And we were never, ever discussing having children or not having children among even ourselves. So, why would these criminals invite us to their place? And then, of the most important question they asked was whether we were going to have any children. What was the importance? It became very clear to me that the reason why they were doing that was part of this trap they had created in their fantasy to kind of put us in a compromised light, in the sense that the midgets conspired or got it in their heads that I was having an affair with Sandra Compton. So they were secretly filming me and my wife at their home while they interrogated us with this stupid, antisocial, idiotic question whether we were having any children or not. And they passed on the video to Sandra Compton by saying that Muhammad is married to his wife, and this is the evidence of his wife and him. It is like an elaborate scam done on a scale of about 10 times as complicated and as corrupt, as poisonous as Colin Rooney has accused Rebecca Vardy of doing. So we shall be going into details about the midget Ali Asghar and his midget wife Majeda. And I should talk about Sandra Compton and how I came to meet Sandra Compton, and how months after or maybe more than a year after I last saw her, she came out of nowhere at a meeting in the friends' meeting house and rushed to me and embraced me as if I was her long lost friend. And then it was Stokely Carmichael, remember? Stokely Carmichael and the attempt by Sandra on that occasion to shake hands with Stokely Carmichael and have a few words of exchange. But there was a man from the African origin called Sam from Hackney or Islington. How pathetic and poisonous! I had actually helped this Sam without knowing him a year or so earlier when he was being accurately prosecuted for criminality. But my line was that he was being penalized or persecuted for opposing racism. That was in good faith. I had done that simply on the basis that Sam was being treated unfairly by the racists. And how does he repay this? I didn't expect him to repay this whatsoever. But when I and Sandra were near Stokely Carmichael, Sam physically intervened and pushed us away from Stokely Carmichael. Black solidarity or solidarity against racism internationally. So these are the poison people, personified poison, who are among the poisonous, absolute, contemptible poison that have been undermining all efforts in good faith at ethically creating an ethical framework for fighting racism in this country. I don't owe anything to these criminals for me to have gone the extent I had gone to the ILEA's then Director of Education at the ILEA for Sam, because Sam was employed in a semi kind of capacity in an ILEA kind of role in Hackney, North London. And my interventions have effectively saved Sam from being prosecuted, harassed, etc., etc. I mean, there is a strand, there is this kind of noticeable line of jealousy, pettiness, and hatred and spite running through the veins of these so-called anti-racists. They're jealous. Now, I'm not a careerist, and anything I do is ethically, morally, absolutely, impeccably ethically, morally inspired and encouraged. It's not something that I do because at the end of the day, I would get a reward. To have that position is one thing, but to be accused without any specific evidence of having done something vaguely wrong. What was the wrong in the efforts to have Sandra Compton shake hands with Stokely Carmichael? Although we didn't continue meeting after that, my memory of Sandra Compton is that she is one of the persons that has got her heart in the right place and is very well intentioned and a universal human being. The fact that she is white didn't, of course, stop her having a relationship with some of the nastiest so-called black-skinned individuals. I think she did that in good faith. I had no relationship with her, but the midget Ali Asghar wanted to create the scenario that I had. My interest in Sandra Compton's company and vice versa was that we were having very substantial amount of ethical conversation about the state of racism in this country and fighting racism and the ways to fight racism and the various obstructions that came in the way. That is what we talked about. And the midget Ali Asghar intruded, broke our privacy, if you like, my and my wife's privacy, and defamed us and lied. Now, midget Ali Asghar, of course, has an agenda against me. What that is simple. Nowhere in the Kurd Bangladeshi community or the Asian subcontinent community in the UK is there an activist campaigning in the way that I have been campaigning. So, along the line, these criminals must have met some other criminals who must have shared this particular core about my campaigning, which is that I focus on the criminality of the criminals and I try to address the criminality and remove the criminality from the campaign against racism. It is a fascinating investigation that I owe it to the whole of humanity to share. So we shall be doing that in due course. Now, going back to the piece about the Satan Rushdie being allegedly attacked in New York and the kind of endless stream of outraged pieces by Fleet Street and its equivalent in New York against Muslims, that is the main kind of theme, but we have got other items as well. So we have been on this broadcast for how long? Let's check. So it's 22 minutes so far. I'm going off the screen and I'll reappear before the camera in, I think, within 2 minutes, if not within 1 minute. So this is the Kudila television channel being broadcast on the internet under the main theme of Baby Angel Geronimo. And this is the edition dated the 16th of August 2022, the second edition actually of the same date. Really. Now, when Sandra Compton embraced me at the Friends Meeting House, I wasn't even thinking about her presence. I had forgotten about her. And when she embraced me, I didn't recognize her, and which was significant because it had been only maybe a year since I last had seen her physically. So the fact that I didn't recognize her showed that I was so indifferent. So that actually should be added to the diagnosis of the sickness in the spiteful mind of Ali, the midget Ali Asghar. And when we went outside of the event, and Stokely Carmichael was kind of shaking hands with people, and Sandra Compton kind of pushed me towards where Stokely Carmichael was. I had no idea that this Sam and Sandra Compton knew each other or had known each other. I had no idea at all. So when Sam, came and physically parted us from Stokely Carmichael, he was furious to see me in close proximity with Sandra Compton. He was being jealous, whereas I had no idea that was probably the case. I had no idea whatsoever. And the other thing is that the way that he physically intervened showed a deep sense of hatred against me. What had I done against him? Now, if that is extrapolated and to include some other African origin or Caribbean origin, quote, leaders or activists in the UK over the last few decades, it can be established, credibly established, that if not everyone, almost all the majority of the so-called leaders suffer from this kind of hatred, insecurity. And the insecurity and hatred is directed against the likes of me. That is to say, I come from the Asian background and they come from the African background. In their minds, I am in some kind of competition with them. And so they are in competition with me. I have never been in competition with anyone when it comes to ethics and morality. Well, I haven't been in competition with anyone really about anything. One of the main reasons is that there is no competition needed for me to get whatever is needed. That is to say, that I have I have no I have known material kind of success much more easily than most people may have done. And I don't need to compete. Suffice to say that if I were to actually engage in a competition or embark on a competitive course, I think it would be very difficult for most competitors to kind of stand the course, etc., etc. The battle I fight and the battle I kind of fight for is moral, ethical. It's not material. And I would never do anything, I have never done anything consciously to stop somebody benefiting morally, materially. I may disagree with them, but that is one thing. But to stop them materially benefiting is another matter. So that was Stokely Carmichael and Sandra Compton, and this character from Hackney or North London called Sam. Now, there have been so many Sams in the last few decades that have given me cause to ask this question: why do they behave like this? For example, this guy who is no longer around, he passed away. He was based in Brixton, in Lambeth, and he was a kind of musician, whatever. And at one stage of the Black Parents Association activities and the London Collective of Black Governors activities and campaigns in the early 1990s, I noticed that this guy was actually pointing to his head with his finger as he was speaking to another person of African background or a Caribbean background. What the body language suggested was that he was saying, the wrong thing, but he was saying that I was there, although the majority of the people present there were of African origin, but I was there because I was after something. Now, if I were after something in the sense that he meant, then why wasn't I a member of parliament decades ago? I could have been. I mean, it only takes me to agree to ignore the lies of the kind of sponsoring party or grouping, and then I can get elected. And it applies to any other kind of post or career. Back where I come from, I gave no support to any political party. As soon as I realized that every political party in then East Pakistan was corrupt, I withdrew my support for them on any issue whatsoever. And I remain so to this day. I would not support a lying cabal doing business by calling itself an Islamic party. And I would not do similar things. I mean, I would not condone a lying outfit that wasn't trading as an Islamic one, but trading nonetheless in the area called East Pakistan or the country. This stream of news item and comments witnessed in Fleet Street and mainstream media in the last kind of few days concerning various aspects of the British universities being condemned by various establishment figures. And I think one of the discernible reason why they have been doing this is to do with the continuation of the kind of partnership with the USA in tickling the Chinese. I mean, what does it mean for Britain to tickle a substantially bigger power as China? I mean, they have said various things against the universities, recruiting students from China and Chinese and other foreign countries, foreign, remember foreign. And they've been saying other things like many of the Chinese students are spies against Britain, things like that. Now, these are coming in statements from these people, former vice chancellor, this, that, and the other. So, when these topics are attempted to be discussed at informal sessions, informal settings, what I have noticed among the likes of I'll come to that in a short while. I'll come to that in a short while. We'll be discussing that in a short while. Now, this is I don't know how this is the cover, almost there. This is the cover of Tuesday's supplement with the daily Boris Johnson graph. The supplement is called Features. And this crossed out image is that of the satanic verses. And what the heading or the caption to the piece underneath reads, I shall read that one. It says, why this book would not be published today. This is not an endorsement by the daily Boris Johnson graph of the anti-Muslim line, but this is a panic scream that Muslims must be denied the right to protest. That is fascism as Hitler kind of practiced it. Now, when people like Sandra Compton, the white woman who could be described as a middle class, go out of their way to kind of acquaint themselves with the core of the belief and culture of the so-called black community, which she must have done when she befriended or she was befriended by this character called Sam. These are the people that actually constitute the bigger influence among the ordinary people in Britain, among the indigenous people in Britain. Now, I'm talking about the time that all of this was happening. My meeting Sandra Compton, my meeting Stokely Carmichael. These were happening in the 19 so we'll come to that more in due course, because at every level, at the academic levels, at the kind of campaigning level, at the levels of gatherings held across this country, allegedly to address the discrimination, racism, etc. I have found myself on the one hand, at the one end, if you like, or on the arguing for a wider, deeper, more solid intellectual, moral, ethical commitment. While the main quote leaders traveling across to, from these venues where I have found myself attending by coincidence of so and this has been regardless of whether the other side or the majority have been from the African background or the Caribbean background or the Asian background, etc. I have to also hasten to add that the presence at these events of mainly Hindu participants has been very significantly very small. So the campaigners have actually been of the backgrounds such as myself and people from Pakistan, people from India, not Indians with Hindu kind of background, but India has got a lot of people who are Indian but not Hindu. So these people have been mesmerized by the evidence, and they have not been wrong to be mesmerized, because my speeches at those events have been, and similar events are, quite noticeably different. The contents, the style, the base of evidence, and the contemporary frame of reference, including even some of the satire. And when these very jealous, petty, spiteful individuals discover my modus operandi in terms of the intellectual content and the perspective, their first reaction is to wonder in amazement as to how to deal with me, meaning how to deactivate the campaigns that I've been doing. So the event at the University of Manchester, where I was the keynote speaker, the event at the University of Manchester, where I was the only keynote speaker, was followed by a so-called dinner. And during the dinner, I found myself seated opposite a very pernicious, poisonous Hindutva woman. I had not made any contact with her, I had not been introduced to her, but she started mumbling and muttering, and then increased her use of ferocious, provocative language and words against me. There was only one explanation. She was burning, she was kind of absolutely on fire with hatred and jealousy. Because when I spoke as the keynote speaker, my speech went down very well, because it was frequently I had to pause because of the people clapping. And the one phrase that I used during that speech was actually started by using the mental slaves Haman Ousley. The role and the personification of the mental slave Haman Ousley I described and denounced evidentially. And I applied the phrase XYZ got sucked in. And that sucked in was the phrase that went down very well with the audience there in the University of Manchester. There was an outlet called West Indian World, the weekly paper called West Indian World. At the time, the West Indian World was being controlled by a Jamaican born person of Chinese origin, Alfred Tang Chao. Alfred Tang Chao actually ran for about a year a weekly column by me. And Tang Chao admitted more than once. That, as far as he knew, I was the selling point. I mean, can you imagine? I was the selling point of a weekly newspaper, being told all of this by the person who controlled it. And yet he refused. This Alfred Tang Chow, he refused to recognize that there is a difference between the payment of a salary or money or whatever and the basic cost of transport. So when I spoke at Manchester University, by that time I had stopped talking to Alfred Tang Chow because of his propensity to drink, etc., didn't help things. But I also found that he was very, very, very lost politically in the context of the fight against racism in the intellectual, evidential field. However, when I spoke at the University of Manchester as the keynote speaker, Alfred Tang Chow had physically moved to kind of a place in Brixton somewhere, some kind of, and either there or on the telephone, he he mentioned the speech I had given at the University of Manchester. But before any discussion took place, he had actually published a kind of semi-truthful piece of satire about my speech, and he had to admit that I had the audience in stitches with my humorous kind of delivery and humorous content. So that was about 5 years, 4 years after the Scarman report on Brixton. And there, on the publication of this Scarman report event that was paid for in terms of organization by the then Commission for Racial Equality. And I can tell you that Alfred Tang Chow, I think Alfred Tang Chow would have liked to have continued to publish that West Indian World. But something happened, and apparently he died. That's what his then kind of personal or girlfriend told me, that Alfred had died. My view is that not only was the West Indian world duty bound to cover the activities of the black community, because although it was called West Indian world, the contents had to be way, way, way far more than the West Indian communities could materially kind of produce. They're numerically overwhelmed by the numbers of black people from other backgrounds or other countries. So it was my principle in agreeing to write a weekly piece for the West Indian world, was to help the West Indian world develop into a weekly, competent commentary and a source, or the definitive source, of intellectual combat against the racists and their apologists. And where did Alfred Tang Chow disappear? I have not I have not seen or kind of discussed her activities with Paulette North. Paulette North was a National Union of Teachers activist, and she was at the time the last I knew was that she was living with a National Union of Teachers activist called Dick North. And Dick North and Paulette Watty actually, ended up being the two most active NUT members at the school in Sadak called Lillian Baylis. It was through Paulette North and Dick North that I became aware of what was going on in that school. And whatever was going on in that school was not something that the London Collective of Black Governors or the Black Parents Association or indeed myself shall I put that in the bag? These items that the person near me is putting in the bag or trying to put in the bag. Okay, so Paulette North and Dick North were then joined, separately, of course, joined by other individuals familiar with the Lillian Baylis School. And the more information they gave me, the clearer it became to me that I had been absolutely morally, evidentially correct. When a few years previous to that, I had spent about 18 months in fending off an individual who wanted to really get close to me sexually and so on. And I spent all that 18 months in terms of the contract by describing various episodes of various campaigns that I had done where I was left standing while all the others who had joined the campaign at the beginning had disappeared. And this individual kept repeating to me that they won't disappear like the others. Okay, so I'll catch up on this one later, not in this particular edition. What I'm trying to establish is a picture that, unlike in the USA and unlike any other century, let's say the last 50 years or so, on the ground, the intellectual engagement that I have made against racism has been without match, without any parallel, and has been very much the reason why quite a few things have changed, not to benefit me, but quite a few things have changed whereby others have grabbed hold of the changes. Whether they have claimed in private sessions the authorship of these is a different matter. What has happened is that at universities, at the media, in the media, mainstream media, etc., within campaigning groups or campaigning events, it has become very clear that a swift separation has taken place between me on the one hand and all the other leaders of African, Asian, Bangladeshi, non-Bangladeshi, Muslim, non-Muslim backgrounds on the other. It has happened too many times. It has happened so many times that there is a pattern now. And if there is a pattern that is significant as this one has been, then there has been not one, but several series of what is conventionally called books. So if I were to expand and award credits for each point, so each point. So what time did we start and how long have we been on this broadcast? It's 57 minutes, and we shall continue on the theme of this one, the Citing Rushdie. The Citing Rushdie coverage in the daily Boris Johnson graph in its featured supplement with the daily Boris Johnson graph dated the 16th of August 2022 says, why this book would not be published today. And I've got a crossed out the book, Citing Rushdie's book. And that is an absolutely mature and intellectually sound statement, although it's in the interrogative. But why this book should not be published is one thing, and would not be published is completely different. We would say that the book should not be published. And we shall come back to should not be published in a couple of minutes. Why is they're saying that this book would not be published today, Satanic Verses, because of the emergence in the last, let's say, 30 years of what they, the daily Boris Johnson graph, call the woke movement or woke kind of activism. And the piece on page 2, the piece on page 2 and, well, pages 2 and 3, the pieces include the main one by somebody called Jake Courage. I have to investigate whether this Courage is related to Roy Courage at all. And the other piece is, of course, the woman that had been condemned by the Australian writer of the female eunuch. Not about the female eunuch, but this is the phrase that was used about Susan Moore. When Susan Moore was given the spot previously occupied by the writer of the So, what this piece by Jake Courage is saying is what all the so-called anti-woke so-called writers have been saying, that they are saying that Satan Rushdie has been wronged by people who are hostile to the civilized freedom of expression right. They say that the Muslims are, of course, from the darkness, that Muslims who burned a copy of the Satanic Verses in Bradford in 1989 actually belonged in a backward age that had been last seen 1,000 years earlier. I say 1,000 years, if this is a decoration, because the people of Bradford only acted spontaneously. I couldn't take part in any physical, peaceful demonstration at that time because I was not near any demonstration. And I would only go to a demonstration that would be so when they burned the book in Bradford, they did that as a symbolic kind of gesture of outrage to show contempt for Satan Rushdie, who had insulted the Prophet, peace be on him. And as I said earlier, when I spotted the midget Amit Roy on the edge of the pavement, if you like, near the Penguin book in Hammersmith, Amit Roy was looking quite nervous, and he was kind of shielded by a white person who came and looked at me with anger and hostility and kind of collective spite, because he wrongly concluded that I was physically threatening Amit Roy. I wasn't. And he also wrongly concluded that I had some grudge against Omitra. I didn't. When I first went into the kind of Telegraph diaries, which is how it was called, the Telegraph Office, Peterborough Court, I saw the midget, Amit Roy, literally nervous at that time as well, as he tried to tell the reception desk to turn me away, in a polite way, of course. Now, everything that Amit Roy has written, and most of his so-called journalism has been in the UK, has been platformed by the daily Boris Johnson graph. So when we talk about the Muslims in the context of Satan Rushdie, we are faced with the picture of Muslims collectively painted by somebody like Amit Roy, who is the last person to have any diagram or any idea about the Muslims and what actually lies behind the anger. I mean, not long ago I went to the local Tesco. So when Amit Roy saw me in Hammersmith, he was looking nervous because I was face to face with him, and I demanded why did he write such rubbish. My information about him was that I had remembered what he said about the Muslims of the subcontinent and their hostility to English education. Now, looking at the blanket ban, emptiness being maintained by Fleet Street about what is happening in Pakistan. And what is happening in Pakistan is mainly in Urdu. I mean, Imran Khan and his comrades in the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf have been drawing crowds that cannot be described as crowds. They're actually millions of people across Pakistan are actively responding to Imran Khan and the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. These millions are numerically much more bigger and more enthusiastic than anything that has been seen in the Arab Spring or in Egypt or any of the other countries in the Arabic speaking worlds. Imran Khan has also developed into, I would say, an accomplished speaker in the tradition of the of the Jalsas, the Islamic Jalsas, in Silot, we would call them waz. Jalsa is gathering, and waz, or the Islamic waz gatherings. The Islamic waz gatherings were addressed overnight by very, very respected alims and scholars. And what we found in those waz mahfils was that the audience were riveted and very respectful of the speakers, and every speaker was a scholar in their own right, a scholar deeply knowledgeable about the history of the first, let's say, first 100 years of the establishment of Islam. And people were moved to tears, etc., etc. For me, going to the ones that I could go to had an impact on my understanding of the history. Now, when I went to the Murari Chand College a few years later, my history teacher, one of my history lecturers, Mr. Mazharul Haq, was quite visibly moved by my kind of familiarity with the history, etc. And he was very, very full of encouraging words and so on. But that is the secret, because I had already been introduced to the Islamic history at those was mahfils, and I had taken them in. I had absorbed the knowledge, and I had been very pleased that I was absorbing the knowledge. Now, the Islamic history of the period, let's say the first 100 years, I think, is what Imran Khan has been now kind of trying to synthesize with the current events and his needs. Now, the way he's been delivering increasingly every new speech that he makes about the Prophet's saying is a better one in terms of delivery, in terms of communication. What is most important, as I have said before, is that Imran Khan is coming across as a much better Islamic scholar, Maulana, than anyone that I had seen. Well, on the platforms, in the wazes, anyway. What is even more better is that Imran Khan is coming across as a secularly dressed, secularly dressed kind of courier of a message that applies to India, the secular India, the Hindutva India, as much as it does to the Pakistan and the Bangladesh. So I think that is a big, big step forward for Imran Khan in terms of delivery, in terms of communication, and in terms of creating an idea, a persona in the subcontinent that has been absent always. We can't go back to 700 years or 500 years when the Mughals were in place. Whether anyone during the Mughal period of 700 years was as good a speaker, as dedicated to Islam as Imran Khan is coming across as, is something that I have to check and find out. But without checking that, Imran Khan is coming across as plausible, I would say. This is 01:14 hours GMT on Wednesday, the 17th of August 2022, and we're broadcasting the Khudilar television channel, Baby Angel Geronimo's theme. And what has happened in Pakistan is that, contrary to the expectations of the foreign imposed regime, that once they had undermined Imran Khan's short-lived government of 2.5 years or 3 years, and Imran Khan was ousted from office, then the chores, the thieves would come back with ferocious force and re-establish themselves with ferocious confidence and commitment and so on. Nothing of that kind has happened. It's Imran Khan who has become not only the Islamic scholar equivalent, but he has become a pop icon. As I said, there are more than 100 numbers have been recorded. And these numbers are far better, on average, than any of the playback numbers that have been included in the films in South India. And the passion and the jazba and the dedication and the sincerity of the participants in these videos are something to behold. So they are having infectious effects on the rest of the country. And as I said about Fariha Parvez, Fariha Parvez has been, praised by some people watching her performances in India as one of the most beautiful, physically beautiful persons. And she is also artistically very talented. And I read somewhere else, or I heard somewhere else, that the women of Pakistan are pretty. Now, this is helping, this is not hindering. This is helping the movement that Imran Khan is leading now. Most of the women that appear on the meetings or whatever, on average, are very, very attractive in the average. So, combination of this attractiveness and the combination of the delivery of the message and the updates are having a very unprecedented effect on the shaping of Pakistan in the democratic way, in the true democratic way. पाकिस्तान की मतलब क्या? ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह, तेरे मेरे रिश्ता किया, ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह. These are very much in keeping with the spirit of the people. These are not at odds with the spirit of the people of Pakistan that are flocking to Imran Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf gatherings and jalsas. For the first time, there has been this fusion between the founding values of Pakistan as being articulated by Imran Khan and the Tehreek-e-Insaf and the people of Pakistan, who are very vigorous and very young and very forceful and very hopeful and very much confident. Now, what I have said before is that this is going to have devastating effects on the Hindutva morons across the border in India. Because the Hindutva morons can never produce anything like this. There will be lots and lots of problems for the Hindutva morons to come up with anything comparable. And unlike the Times of Tuesday, the London Times of Tuesday, the 16th of August, the Times has published a stupid editorial. The Times has published a stupid editorial praising India and praising India without any substance whatsoever. And it's completely plasticky praise, unconnected with any reality of what is happening in India. And it's all to do with the promptings from Washington, D.C. and the strategic needs of the Biden administration or the American kind of state to have a go at China. And the other thing is that the axis, the connection between the Indian Hindutva regime and Washington political establishment is one of unity against the Chinese. So the Times has published a pack of lies about the anniversary of the 75th anniversary events in India. The 17th anniversary events in India have not produced anything remotely similar to what Pakistan has done under the initiative and leadership of the Tehreek-e-Insaf. Every aspect of what Imran Khan has done about the 75th anniversary or 75 years is way, 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 way too high for the Modi Hindutva morons to reach. And it's all contaminated in the Modi cabal. And I think that the next phase, after the routing of the Nawaz Sharif family in the by-elections held in Pakistan, Punjab. I think the next election, whenever the election happens, the next election, ceteris paribus, that is to say, other things remaining the same, as Mr. Schumpeter in the MC College would say. Mr. Schumpeter would say, other things remaining the same, ceteris paribus, that the election in Pakistan, the next general election in Pakistan, would be an unprecedented election. An election of the kind of democratic generosity and spontaneity that should have been held before but hasn't been, but will be held in a way that breaks thousands of records and creates an atmosphere in Pakistan for a democratic future. We shall come back to that update on a daily basis, of course. Now, in the case of the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, for example, in the case of the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, where the council has been lumbered with the elected mayor obscenity, what is going on there? Because when the first so-called election to the post was held in October 19, 2010, and Lutfur Rahman was declared the winner. The coverage in the Western kind of media repeated the lie that he was the first Muslim mayor in a Western European country or something like that. Now, that is absurd because the election to the post of mayor was not based on faith. The election was not held on the faith or belief of the particular voter, nor was the purpose defined as being related to any faith whatsoever. And it follows that the same applies to the posts of councillors. Compared to the kind of apologies or apologists typified by a man called Councillor Kabir Ahmad, who made an appearance as a supporter of Lutfur Rahman on the 19th of May 2022 in the BBC Newsnight program reported by David Grossman. According to this councillor Kabir Ahmad, the results of the 5th of May elections in Tower Hamlets, including the quote election of Lutfur Rahman, the result of the elections or results of the elections vindicated Lutfur Rahman's critics. What does that mean? That means that Lutfur Rahman's critics had got it right, and that the allegations of corruption against Lutfur Rahman had been proven. That, in a nutshell, is what vindicated means. But Councillor Kabir Ahmad couldn't care less whether he came across as a lunatic or he came across as a responsible, conscientious, conscious elected member of the Weavers' Ward in Tower Hamlets. Kabir Ahmad said that the results of the 5th of May 2022 elections at Hamlets that saw Lutfur Rahman's quote election as a mayor and the Aspire Party's councillors elected in the majority. Kabir Ahmad said that those results showed that Lutfur Rahman's critics or enemies had been vindicated. Vindicated is the word or the term that we are focusing on, because that is so brazenly contradictory that it has to be extensively analyzed until Councillor Kabir Ahmad withdraws his other remarks that he made in context when he was asked to provide substance, that he did provide. Now you can see the picture of this elderly Labour Party woman called Lillian Collins. Now Lillian Collins is the kind of white elderly woman who has appeared to have latched on to Lutfur Rahman, as have the couple called, a couple from the Wapping area where there is a property that belongs to the Towners Council but is being occupied by this pair. So these are very small number of white people in a party, in a grouping that Lutfur Rahman kind of represents within quotation marks, technically represents, not ethically or morally, but technically. So if these people were to be interrogated independently, objectively, what would be the one thing that they would say in favor of Lutfur Rahman, quote, winning on the 5th of May 2022? And we don't know exactly the words that they would use, but they would use words that would not be truthful. So we've got a smattering of white people in terms which is very much in the demography, in the ordinary population in Tower Hamlets. It is very clear that the demography, the electorate in Tower Hamlets is prominently mainly kind of white. If not very white, it's mainly white. So in the borough that is white, the election that took place on the 5th of May 2022 would have had a tremendously different result. Lutfur Rahman and his, quote, party gang would have lost the seats. What prevented the loss? Does anyone know? Does anyone know why Lutfur Rahman didn't lose and why the others, non-Lutfur Rahman parties, etc., didn't? So the time has been, how long have we been there? 1 hour and 31 minutes. We shall be continuing for another half an hour and we shall then kind of end the program until the next edition. But some point needs to be made very clearly. Whenever there is an election in the UK context, there are certain common things that happen. People get leaflets sent to them, and the names appear to be pushed into the back of the so when the election took place on the 5th of May 2022, so far there has been not enough evidence of any of the wrongdoings that Luthraman was accused of doing, indulging in by Richard Morey. Now, what Luthraman means by so Luthraman did not speak or has not spoken really about the demography. Now, this is so very unlike what has been happening in Pakistan, because in Pakistan, Imran Khan has been garnering huge numbers of Pakistanis. So it's a mystery. If, as Luthraman claimed, to one of the so-called left radical outlets, maybe including the like more than enough, more than enough. So what we have got is a council now full of yes man. It literally is yes man, because there is not one single woman councillor on the Luthraman side in that armed council. When the Labour Party in 2010 had decided to select Luthraman as the Labour Party's official candidate for election, official candidate for election in October 2010, the ordinary public belief the nothing in the published statements mentioning Luthraman in the and available in the council's website since the 5th of May 2022 quote elections. everything that has appeared in the council's website and everything that has been published by the corrupt, congenitally corrupt liars like Dave Hill in praise of Lutheraman has been a spin and a lie. And every statement that the likes of Councillor Kabir Ahmad has made after the 5th of May 2022 on the belief, in the belief that they are now protected from going through experiences. Because although there is no easy direct access to the point beyond the entrance, the space is otherwise easy to walk on. I mean, see, one of the recent admissions by the quote education, let's say lobby, has added the issue of Brexit. So everything that has happened in the election and since the election is being observed as being very, very intentionally managed by their advisors who want to open email addresses, etc., etc. And the email address that I gave to Sue everything that happened in the election in 2022 can be traced to the operation of two things. One is that malafide communications, and the other is malafide do there is no mention in any of the circulation or circulated documents or statements by Lutheraman to the accountability of the council to the voters, accountability to the members of the cabinet for the behavior of the decision-making behavior of Royal London Hospital. So there is no mention in anything that Lutheraman has said or anything that any of his apologists have said that the council, as a council, will stop lying to people who it is in contact with. Because lying is the biggest lying is the biggest kind of aspect of the corrupt mayor system because he can just hide the image of a good number of people. Well, this is the number as well, isn't it? I mean, you can check that with the phone, yeah. So when the Labour Party decided that Lutheran was the Labour Party's candidate for the elected mayor, they did that before allegations were put to the National Executive Committee about other misdeeds, etc., that Lutheran wanted to put. The issue of the boxes that we have been talking about the off air is that if you look at the university libraries, for example, the Bodleian libraries in Oxford and the British Library not far from the Oxford University in Eastern Road, or indeed the Packard, that is what Donald Trump is hoping. Although Maulana Shamsul Haq was not mentioned in the BBC Newsnight report on the 19th of May 2022 by so the Labour Party praised Luther Rahman and I think the weight of evidence is that we shall be continuing updating on other issues in the other editions. So we shall be calling this one to an end earlier than 2 o'clock. So this is 0144 hours GMT and it's 2:44 hours British local time. We're calling an end to this one. And I shall update on all the other outstanding issues.